Does this work? Let's go. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Let's pick up where we left off yesterday. And where we left off was kind of, hypothesis that there are strengths and weaknesses to reinforcement learning and formal synthesis as we saw them yesterday. That reinforcement learning is great because you don't really have to have the system model. It's great to handle uncertainty. It's computationally tractable. Formal synthesis is great because you have these temporal logics that are supposedly user-friendlier than reward design, and you can also have guarantees. So now what I would like to do today is dig in a little bit into the principles of reinforcement learning, principles of formal synthesis. Here and there's going to be some kind of exercise, so you might want to have a pen and paper, unless you are human calculators, and we will try to go through that. Okay. So this is reinforcement learning with thanks to Patrick Jensfeld sitting over there. I did not know he's going to be here, so let's see what happens. Okay. So, reinforcement learning basics recap. We had an agent, there was a policy that the agent was taking decisions according to the policy. Every time agent takes an action, something happens in the environment. The environment returns to the agent reward that the agent gained by this, and the state changes. And again, agent applies action according to its policy, and it keeps going like this. It is driven by rewards, and the goal is to maximize expected rewards. So now let's take a look at a very, very super simple problem. We have a fully observable environment. There are like, say that it's a room. There is a obstacle here. The room is partitioned into squares. You have a robot here, and the robot wants to go here, which is kind of like a goal place, and here that it wants to avoid, which is kind of unsafe place. So this is the states of the robots are actually its position in the possible positions in the world, and actions that the robot can take is up, down, left, right. So now let's say that whenever the action takes a step, it collects a reward. So if it takes a step anywhere that is not marked, let's say that it collects a reward of 0. When it steps on a spot where there is +1, it collects reward +1. When it steps on the unsafe space, it collects reward -1. Now, how should the robot behave optimally? How do I actually collect +1? What do I need to do? This is easy. This is warm-up. So what do I need to do with my robot if there is a start? Move. But how do I move? Which actions from up, down, left, right do I take?
Where it's free.
I can do up. Right. I do up, right. Then brings me to +1. That's great. And that one I can call a policy. That's going to be my policy that dictates what I should be doing. Now, let's say that the robot is not so perfect. It's got actuators that may fail, that may not go as you would anticipate. So when you apply any action, with probability 80%, this action is going to happen as you wanted it. But with probability 10%, it's going to end up on one of the sides. Right? If there is a wall, let's say that with probability 0.1, it stands at the spot that it was. So you pull your actuator, and you have only 80% probability that you end up where you want it to be. Now, let's say that we look at our policy, up, right. What is the probability that I will collect +1 in this environment? How do I compute it? Now it's time for pen and paper, if you will.
The probability associated with each step.
Yeah, so the probability is associated with each step, right? So for instance, I have probability 80% that I'm going to end up here, right? Then what's the probability that I'm going to end up here? Exactly, 0.8 times 0.8. And then times 0.8 times 0.8 times 0.8, right? That's great, but there is also other way how the robot can get to +1, and that is through here. So if the robot is applying this up, up, right, 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 and then it applies up here, but ends up here with 10%, right? So 10% plus 10% plus, not plus, times. 10% times 10% times 10% times 10% times 80%. Do you see how I came to that? No. You do. Who else?
What is the gray? Does the gray mean?
It's obstacle.
Can I go there in?
You cannot go there. It's an obstacle, right? So you cannot go outside of your environment.
Is there still 10% that I would end up in there? Or?
No, no. It's if you are a robot and there's an obstacle, you have 80% chance you're going to end up front, and then you try to. If you were to go to right, you just stay where you are. So there's a 10% chance that you actually stay when you are where you are. Yeah.
But it's not random function. We make code. We decide also in which way the robot will change.
Yeah, but the robot is not perfect, right? It's a physical system. There is, the slippery floor, all these kind of things. So when I say go straight, the robot might pull the actuators as going straight, but there is this environmental conditions that makes it not go straight. It's a,
But once we end, for example, after the first step in the second, so to the right,
yeah.
10%, don't we recalculate it then? Because then I would say I would go to 3,
Yeah.
1, and then I have again 0.8.
Yeah. That's what we should be doing, right? But say that you just blindly repeat this policy.
Okay.
Yeah? If you blindly repeat this policy and you go up, up, right, 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 you've got 0.8, 0.8, 0.8, 0.8, 0.8 plus 0.1, 0.1. So 0.1 is probability that when applying action up here, you will end up here. Now 0.1 is probability that when applying action up here, you're going to end up here. 0.1 is the probability that when applying action right, you will end up here. And so on. So what we get is 0.8 to the power of 5 plus 0.1 to the power of to the power of 4 times 0.8. And that's something like 0.33 probability. So if I blindly stick to my policy like this, I get about 33% chance that I'm actually going to collect one. Yes?
Is there a chance that the robot go to the right down corner and then turn left, and then it's like you roundabout?
Yeah, that can happen, right? It's 0.1, 0.1, then 0.8, 0.8 because we are applying right? 0.8, and then 0.1, 0.1. But then it ends up here and does not collect its reward. So it does not count into the collecting +1.
But it could end up at -1.
It could end up at -1. It could end up in -1. That's absolutely true. So now the question is, what is the expected reward? If we said that there is a 33% chance that we are going to collect 1, is the expected reward 0.33? No. Why not? Exactly. We have to account for that minus 1, as was said. We can end up in -1 in a particular cases. So that the probability that I will end up in -1 has to go in there. Right? Does it make sense? Okay, so that's the basic setup. Any further questions? So now, how we formally grasp it. Okay, so one more question actually. Can we do better than that? And I think that was answered already. So if we don't stick to our precise policy and we don't do up, up, right, 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 but we actually make decisions that, okay, I wanted to go up, but I accidentally ended up here. So now what I should be doing is actually going to the right, not going up. So suddenly, your policy shouldn't be a predefined sequence of action. It should be in a way reactive. There should be some kind of feedback. You observe where you ended up, and you try to apply different action based on where you actually ended up. And that one we call policy. Policy is a function of state, right? There are different kind of policies. Some of them are history independent, some of them are history dependent. But in this particular case, let's just say that the policy is a function of state. So I know that in order to maximize my reward, here I should probably go up. Okay? Here I should go right. Here I should go up. Here I should definitely go up. And so on. So for each state, I suddenly have the best decision that should be taken from that state to maximize my expected reward. And then the expected reward is going to be more than we just calculated on the previous slide. Does it make sense? Makes sense. Excellent. So how do we formalize this? We formalize this through Markov decision processes. Who has heard of a Markov decision process before? A lot of people have heard, so that's great. We have a set of states, we have a set of actions, we have a transition model that tells me what's the probability coming from one state, applying that action, ending up in a different state. Right? So the probability when I start in cell number 1, and apply action up, the probability that I will end up in 1, 2 is 0.8. T11 up 2, 1 will be 0.1. T11 up 3, 3 is going to be 0. Right? And then I have a reward function. So the reward function tells me what's good, what's not so good. And in this case, +1 is go to goal, -1 is avoid trap, and then I'm actually penalizing every step with -0.04 to kind of encourage my robot to go quickly to the goal. Because you don't want the robot to walk around like this and then go to 1. You kind of want the robot to go there fast. And why is it that small? It's that small so that I don't overweigh the +1 that I'm gonna collect in the end, right? So if this in other cells would be, let's say, -0.5, the best strategy for me would be to just stay where I am, because the penalty for moving is just so high that I will never compensate for it by getting to +1. So the optimality here has much lower kind of importance than getting to the goal, actually. Cool. Now, what we are trying to maximize in reality is some kind of utility function. And the question is, if I have a robot that is supposed to roll around for infinity, right? Some sort of surveillance robot that is supposed to go around and visit all the rooms, then it keeps going around till infinity, and it's gonna end up collecting infinite rewards by visiting the places with the +1s infinitely many times. So how do I compare one infinity with another infinity? right? And the answer to that is that I'm going to discount the rewards. So the immediate future is going to be much more important for me than the things that are far, far away. So the things that are far, far away, I'm less certain about them. So what I'm doing here is using gamma, discounting factor, that is less than 1. And that kind of tells me what's now is more important than what's in future. So this reward is going to count much more than this reward, which is going to count more than this reward, and so on. Very natural thing. The bigger the gamma you choose, what happens if I choose a really big gamma? Then the far distant future is important or not important to me? It is important, right? If I choose very, very, very small gamma, then even close future is not so important to me. Yeah? So that's a reward function that drives my agent. And now what is that reinforcement learning thing? So there are different types of reinforcement learning. I'm going to talk about Q-learning because I know that if you start Googling, Q-learning is probably one of the nice advanced keywords that comes up. So Q-learning, in Q-learning, what you don't know is the transition probabilities, right? So I have my MDP, but I actually don't know what is T. And the system may be just so complex that I may not be even able to explicitly capture my reward function. So when I make a step, I know how much reward I collected, but I'm not going to have it on the side and able to work with it just fine because my system is just way too big to describe that explicitly, right? So Q-learning is designed for systems when you don't know the transition probability beforehand. That's for your autonomous driving when pedestrians are crossing and you don't know how the pedestrians are going to behave. You don't have that modeled a priori. And we call it model free. Now, in Q-learning, we are not really learning the T and the policy separately. We are kind of learning total reward starting from a state S. So that encapsulates T and reward at the same time. So we kind of apply action and then we act optimally. What is really important in Q-learning? Okay, let's go through it. So we initialize the Q value, this is the value of a particular action in a particular state, to 0. Okay, that's fine. In the beginning, I don't know really anything. And then what I'm going to do is choose an action, right? So either you can choose to take the action that so far seemed the best, and that thing we called exploitation, or you can choose a random action, something that you have not tried before, right? I love vanilla ice cream. This is my vanilla ice cream. This is me once a month going and getting a strawberry one, or rhubarb or something crazy, right? So this is a safe choice. This is a choice that makes you explore and realize that there might be something better out there for you. And then you take your action. You observe what's your reward, and you need to update the Q value telling how good that action was in that particular state. And what comes in that Q value is the Q value that you had there before, that's this thing, plus some kind of update weighted by alpha. And alpha is called learning rate. And the choice of learning rate turns out to be quite important. And the choice of this epsilon turns out to be quite important too, because the epsilon tells you how much you exploit, how much you explore. Alpha tells you essentially how fast you learn. So the trick is that if you learn too fast, you might miss some kind of solution. You might be changing and fluctuating quite a lot. If you choose it too small, it's going to take for ages till you converge to the right Q. So that's it. That's the whole magic of reinforcement learning, this kind of iterative algorithm that tries, improves, tries another thing, improves, and the trying is driven by some ratio between trying new things and going for old things, and the improvement is driven by how much the new information impacts what you have seen about the system so far. So you can imagine reinforcement learning is in fact a lot about tuning. Okay, there is much more to the topic, much more to the topic. I can recommend you 2 books to take a look into. Reinforcement Learning by Sutton and Bartow. That's for people who are, I think, more from computer science background, fairly like lighter reading, wordy, pleasant, summer literature. Neurodynamic programming, a little bit more hardcore, a little bit more rigorous, a little bit more for people who actually have maybe control background. Also a very good book. Yeah. Okay, so what I would like you to do now is to try to design a reward function. Yeah. So I have this problem. So I have a card, and there is an inverted pendulum on the card. My goal is to keep the pendulum up. So my card is gonna need to be like going back and forth to balance it out. And here you can see that reinforcement learning is not applicable only to discrete domains, but also continuous domains, right? Continuous time, continuous space. So now the question is, I can apply first +1 or -1. What should be my reward function for a particular state of the system, or for a transition in the system that will keep my pole up? What should drive the learning?
Maybe you want the pendulum to stay up.
Yeah.
Size of theta.
Size of theta.
Or distance from 0.
Distance from 0. So it's a pendulum. So if you stop your car, it's just gonna fall down. So you need to keep moving your car. It's like when you are balancing the plate on a thing. You cannot just stay static. You have to keep moving. Theta dot.
The acceleration, the differentiation of the f and f prime.
Okay. That's to keep it sort of like not making big movements, right? If you or
if you don't have acceleration, then would it stay like that? If it's already in a stable condition.
it's not never going to be stable, right?
Yeah.
You've got to keep moving. So so you need to figure out how you got to keep moving, when to go backwards and when to go forward.
Also, you don't want to move too much. You want to minimize the movement.
Yeah. You might, yeah. So there are a bunch of different solutions. Multiple of those can be right. The simplest one I have seen working is the reward is you collect 1 for every second that the pole stays up. As simple as that. So your state is a state of the system. You see how big is your theta. If your theta drops at 90 degrees, it's not staying up. So if your theta is less than 90 for 1 second, you just collect 1. And then your reward function, even with the discounting, right? The immediate future is going to be more important. And then as you go into the future towards the infinity, the importance of whether you are going to be able to balance after 10 hours is going to be less than whether you are going to be doing that after 1 second, and then keeps it kind of sane. Okay, very cool. So that's one thing. Is it going to be any different if we will want to swing the pendulum up? So now I start and it's lying down. What I need to do is start moving the card so that, like, with particular acceleration, so that I eventually swing it up. So yeah, I mean, collecting reward for staying up is not gonna help us much, right? So what should I do here? There were a couple ideas floating around. Something about theta. Something about theta. It's got to be something about the angle, right? So we need to decrease the angle. So so the most straightforward reward function I have seen used in this case was cosinus theta. As simple as that. So yeah.
I was just reflecting back to hybrid
Yeah.
systems.
Yeah.
If you have modes, you might have different rewards, I presume.
You may, yeah, precisely. Yeah. So there is this project, I think it's called Open AI Lab, and they have like a template for this pendulum, and you can play with it, and you can compete with the biggest names in machine learning who try this too. So that's kind of cool. Okay. One more exercise. Let's say that I have a bunch of elevators serving like a hotel, right? So say that the elevator, we discretize the problem. So we say that the elevator can go up or down, or it can stop. And by stopping, I mean like opening the doors, letting people in, out, closing the door, right? Like make a stop, literally. Now, people want to travel, right? So they push buttons when they want to go down or up. They call the elevator. And also what you need to account for is that there is age to each of the requests, right? And then when they get in the elevator, they again put a drop-off request, right? So now this, if you want to, organize these elevators optimally, it turns out to be a problem that has 10 to the power of 22 states to solve. So you cannot like just do the classical good like state space search in this. And this is really a problem where reinforcement learning is not so much about uncertainty. It's much more about complexity of the problem. So you use it as a heuristic that drives you to learn the best possible strategies. So now the question is, what should be my reward function here? In this elevator example, what should I collect positive rewards for? What should I collect negative rewards for? When I make an action, up, down, or stop, what do I gain for that action? Think.
Fine-tuning to the same direction as the positive. If it's already going down,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a person pressing down button, up button, continue as the direction is going as the positive reward, and not going back in. Oops.
Okay. What else?
One question. Do the elevators have a global view? Because otherwise you may have a function that makes all the elevators go to the same person and all the other people are just waiting.
Yeah, they have a global view. Let's say that they have a global view. That's what makes the problem so complex, because when you try to do it in a centralized way, that's where it blows up really. So going in a similar direction that there is a request.
Even if it's not past that place,
If it's not past that place,
it must be checked.
like you mean you should be collecting reward here, but
Also, it should not come back. Actually,
Yeah?
That's exactly it.
Yeah? So we are creating some kind of rules here. Yeah?
The same direction and less than or more.
Uh-huh.
Place.
What would make this system service all the passengers eventually? Why wouldn't my, elevator just travel between like 3rd and 4th floor if all the passengers are gonna, there's constantly gonna be someone who wants to travel between 3rd and 4th floor, so it's gonna be super easy to just like kind of stay there. What will make my elevator go all the way down or all the way up? Is the waiting time, right? So I need to get into my reward function also waiting times of the people that are there. Right? So,
Does the distance to the current location of the elevator affects? Because if you go a longer distance, it means that you can pick up more person during at one time.
if we go longer distance, we can pick up more people as we go,
Yeah.
right? That is also true. That could be one of the things that we might want to incorporate in.
But isn't it simply like minimizing the total waiting time?
Total waiting time could be one of the things that can be just the reward that drives us. We want to minimize the total waiting time, right? But then, again, like what prevents an elevator just keep servicing these guys and letting the one poor guy on the 12th floor just stay there forever?
Endless waiting time totally.
Yeah. How do we reflect that? We may want to kind of take a look at the longest time any passenger is waiting, for instance. Does it make sense? Yeah. So there are a bunch of different things we might need to take into account. But when you are thinking about this, don't think about what the elevator should be doing, but about what should be the outcome. The outcome is that people should be getting in and getting out where they want, and they shouldn't be waiting too long. And that's what you should be collecting rewards for. And the rest, you can leave for the reinforcement learning to figure out whether it's more beneficial to move in a sequence or not. Because once we start applying these kind of rules, that is our common sense, and that's fine, right? But we are also putting in certain restrictions, and we are advising the system how to behave. But what I want is, I want to collect, say, minus waiting time for every passenger that was serviced. How about that? And then everyone kind of chips with their waiting time in the total reward function with minus waiting time. If I'm trying to maximize it, what I'm minimizing is some function of the waiting times. That's what I want, right? And then I need to find a good function of the waiting times that it becomes good for the customers. It could be the total one, it could be the bottleneck one. I could have customers with golden cards who are more important and they should be valued more than the silver ones. And that can go into the function of the different, of the waiting times of the passengers. Does it make sense? Yeah?
When you talk about waiting time, did you take into account of the number of the people waiting at each floor? Then the waiting time can be summed up for each person, and then the number of the people.
That could go in. That could definitely go in if I take into account how many people I have on each floor. Could go in. So now, the point of this exercise was largely to show you that reward design takes some kind of real intelligence. It just And it depends on how well you design your reward function, what your system is going to get out. So you need to be good at formalizing what you actually want from the system in order to get where you want to be. Cool.
I would assume that the better your physical model is of how waiting times are dependent on some kind of factors, the better or the faster will be your learning.
You're
But
right.
Your learning will still work if just the direction of the reward is in the
Yeah.
correct way.
Yeah.
The reward gets higher when something gets
Yeah.
faster. But the learning will be better if your reward function is more close to the real physics.
Yeah, so if your reward function is closer to the real physics, and if your model that you work with is close to the real system, it helps. It helps to kickstart your learning process. But the funny part is that even if you are off, and even if you are off by a lot, it's still gonna work, because as you go, you are kind of learning how your real model, how your real system look like. It's a data-driven technique. So even if you start from a wrong model, you're gonna converge, if you're lucky enough, to a real system model. Okay, how do you feel? Who feels, the one who feels good stands up now. That's the Martin's exercise. Yay! Okay, sounds good. It's like, it's a peer pressure. Who doesn't stand up? Like, what's wrong? Let's sit down. That's good. That was a leg stretch. So now we are back to our. Now let's undive and take a look into the formal synthesis just very quickly. So in formal synthesis approach, I have a system and I very much rely on the model of the system, and I have behavior specification that may look like something. I have a robot, I want it to survey these rooms. I want to periodically visit region 1 and region 4 here and region 8 here. And I'd never want to enter region 10 here. So what I could do is I could basically label those things with ones and minus ones, and I'm good to go with reinforcement learning, right? Good. This is an alternative. And we will see why we talk about that. So now, my system model in this case is a fully actuated robot. What it in practice means is I think the robot is perfect, right? I give it some kind of input to go somewhere and it just goes there. So it's a perfect world. Everything is nice. It's the very same example as we had in the very beginning with the obstacle in the middle of the room. Now, the behavior specification can be captured through something that we call linear temporal logic. Linear temporal logic is a thing that you might know from formal methods. This one says, always eventually P1, always eventually P4, always eventually P8. So when you say always eventually, it really means it's going to come there infinitely many times. It's going to come there periodically. It's going to survey it. And this is always not P10, and that's something that says, let's not go to P10. So instead of rewards, we now have this linear temporal logic thing, and we have our formal synthesis scheme as we had yesterday. I've got my system. I'm looking for a controller for that system. I've got a linear temporal logic formula, and I'm using some sort of formal verification-based tool to give me an answer. Here is a provably satisfying controller, or sorry, there is no such controller that would provably satisfy the formula. So now, the but part comes in the model, right? So here we had a nice continuous time, continuous space model. The formal methods, formal verification techniques that work with temporal logics are not really fitted to work with continuous time models. So what we need to do is create some kind of abstractions. What we can do is either to split our workspace into some kind of cells and then say that I can travel between two cells of the abstraction if I can travel between two cells in real life. So with my fully actuated robot, you see I can travel between 8 and 9. I have a transition between 8 and 9 in my discrete model. That's one way to kind of capture a discrete model of a control system. Now, it's not always this simple, especially if the robot is not really the fully actuated, it's got mistakes, there is some disturbances and so on. But there is a lot of research that focuses on creating these kind of abstractions also. Another thing that we started calling concretizations is that each state in your discrete state space is not going to be a bunch of states in your original state space. It's going to be one state. So it's one-on-one mapping, but it's not one-on-one because this is only a subset of the real system. So each point here, it's actually a real state, but you just don't have all of them. And there are these sampling-based motion planning techniques and that can give you such abstractions. So this is just a taste that there is this obstacle that we have to go through, that we have to first build some discrete model. And then we can happily apply our technique. This is a peek into the blue box. What's really inside is in automata-based control strategy synthesis, there would be some kind of translation to automaton. There is going to be some manipulation of the transition system. And the automaton, it just creates this big transition system that has states and transitions, very discrete. And then I get to do some kind of graph analysis on the product automaton and come up with accepting run and accepting, or that the accepting run does not exist. This is automata-based. Today we also have SMT-based, satisfiability modular theory kind of things. We also have mixed integer linear programming approaches that are very successful because they use the power of state-of-the-art SMT solvers and MILP solvers. Where I want to get is here. So when we have that blue tool, then we shove it in. We shove in our discrete model. We put in our temporal logic formula. A provably correct path or decision-making or policy comes out. And I'm ready to apply it to my system through the abstractions that the abstraction layer that I created between the continuous model and the discrete model. Why do we use temporal logic? So why would we want to use temporal logic is to, there are a couple of fields where you want to do this instead of reward, say. For instance, in autonomous driving, you might want to get to a goal while obeying road rules, right? So how do you capture road rules through a reward function? Not so easy. Through linear temporal logic and the family of temporal logics, it gets a little bit more feasible. Household robotics, say that you want to pick up all the dirty cups, bring them to the kitchen. If you see a fire, you want to put out a fire. So there is this reactivity element in it. If you see a fire, put out a fire. That's also something that you can capture in the logic quite naturally. With the reward design, as we did with the elevators, just imagine that you are trying to capture something like this. Surveillance robots, you want to patrol regions A, B, C in this order, while never entering a dangerous region. That's yet another thing that can be quite conveniently expressed through temporal logic. So anything that contains temporal evolution of some sort of events, that talks about future, that talks about eventualities, things that need to keep holding. Request response properties are conveniently captured in temporal logic. Now, what is that temporal logic? I know that it looked maybe a little scary. It's not so much. Are you guys familiar with propositional logic? No. Wow. Okay, that's great. That's a challenge. So logic is a way to describe what holds, right? I've got propositions, proposition pi. This time it's not a policy, it's a proposition, something that holds in a particular state, right? My name is Jana, it's true for me, it's false for Martin, right? Then I have propositional connectives, connectives, yeah, in propositional logic. And those are and, or, imply. Very naturally, you hear and. My name is Jana, I'm standing here. That's true. Martin's name is Jana, and he's sitting over there. It's false because the first part of this is false. So with propositional logic, you really capture what holds in a particular state in the system. Linear temporal logic is an extension of that towards evolution, towards sequences of states, right? So what we have is operators that are saying until, next, eventually, always. So with reachability, that's eventually. What you want to say, what you are saying with eventually pi is that sometimes in future pi is going to hold on a sequence of state, on evolution of a system. With safety, you are saying that always not pi holds. In every single state that you go through, not pi holds. So this is a thing that can keep you out of the traps. Right? Surveillance, and then you can start combining. Surveillance, always eventually pi. Always eventually means that at every moment, there is eventually be a moment that pi is going to be satisfied. This is how you enforce your robot to go to a particular room and keep returning to that particular room. You can also impose sequencing through until. So if I say pi1 holds, until pi2 holds, until pi3 holds, then I see that very much on the sequence of states. Pi1 holds until pi2 starts holding, and that holds until pi3 starts holding. And you can also do sequences like eventually pi1 holds, and eventually after that pi2 holds. So here's pi1, and the pi2 can happen here, or here, or here, or here. But if pi2 happens here and does not happen after pi1, that formula does not hold. And you can also have that request-response types of properties. So anytime I get a request, I know that there's going to be a response to that in future. So this is the vanilla LTL. We have a bunch of other extensions that are more interesting because they can also include constraints on time. So I can say that this future has to happen within 10 seconds. I can also have probabilistic extensions. I can have extensions towards continuous time and space and so on. This is the vanilla thing. The thing that I wanted you to do now is to create an LTL formula, your own little LTL specification, right? So this is our LTL language. Remember, we have until, we have next. Next is just like in the next state. We have eventually and always. And level 1 is I have a surveillance robot, and it is required to repeatedly pick up data in location A, pick up data in location B, and drop off data in location C. How would you go around it? Try.
To pick up first both and then drop off?
That's a good question. That whether it matters when they pick up, who picks up first, or
Yeah, I would understand it that it doesn't matter. But
exactly. So there's a little bit of ambiguity of English language. Here I would say also it doesn't matter. Huh? That's something that, of course, when you see an LTL formula, have to see whether that holds or not. Yeah. Hmm? So shoot. Yeah.
Always find like A and B until C.
A and B until C. So I GFA and B
Yes.
until C. Okay, so if I do that, then I require A and B to happen at the same time. So I've got to have GFA and GFB. And then if I put until C, then I've got to stay picking up until I hit C. So why don't I just say GFA and GFB and GFC? That's that. That's going to cut it. I'm going to periodically visit A, I'm going to periodically visit B, I'm going to periodically visit C.
But then you have a probability to go to C before you go to A and B.
That's true. But then you will eventually go to A and B after that, and then you will eventually go to C. So you can go a bunch of times to A, then you can go a bunch of times to C, and you can go a bunch of times to B. So that is where I'm headed with level 2. If you really want to say what you want from the robot, you need to think it through a little bit. But we are running out of time, and I want to give space, enough space to the next speaker. So I'm going to leave this as a homework. Yeah, no, that's not the end. So there is a question, a set of questions for you, right? How would you include optimality requirements into the LTL formulas? So this reinforcement learning thing, that was a lot about optimality, right? We were trying to optimize some kind of expected reward thing. How would you do that here? I mean, with the classical algorithms, I'm just looking for a plan satisfying the LTL formula. I'm not looking for an optimal plan. So that becomes tricky. I need to tweak my algorithms to actually go for the optimality. But then with the algorithms, I'm actually doing the full state space search. That's what's going on today there. And it becomes not so easy. So that's where we are headed with the mixed integer linear programs and things like that. Big question, right? So this is where reinforcement learning is winning. But still, we have guarantees. The guarantees thing is also there to include. How would you express LTL formulas as rewards in the surveillance robot? And how would you express the rewards as LTL formula in the elevator example? So that's a question for you. Huh? Martin, you look like you have an idea.
Well, I guess you could express that you eventually would aim and reach for a certain score, a certain level, for example.
You would eventually aim to reach for a certain level. That's how you would translate.
That's just the first idea.
Yeah. Rewards into LTL formulas.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Using the eventually property.
But then that could work, right? But then you have the threshold.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you do when you reach the threshold?
Oh yeah,
If you want to keep it running for infinity, it's also not so easy.
Yeah.
No?
Always increase.
Always increase. It's an interesting option, but then it means if I put always increase, means that I still have to have some sort of rewards in the system that I'm counting, right? So also, this is an open question. I mean, the answer is basically, it's not so simple, right? And that's where I'm headed with this, is a conclusion that this table that we came to partially together yesterday, it's not so black and white. There are these two techniques. Some of them fit some problems, some of them fit other problems. There are these two specification expression formalisms. Some of them fit better. Some problems, some of them fit better. Other problem, and the recent research trend is using reinforcement learning with formal methods in different shapes. So we have reinforcement learning that is bounded by LTL formulas, so you don't explore space around that does not satisfy the LTL formulas. That's something we saw yesterday with the autonomous driving, the model checking telling you first which actions are safe to apply, and then reinforcement learning picking only from the safe actions. Another trend is, what if I don't have a reward function, but I have LTL formula, but I don't want to go through the model checking type of techniques. I want to use reinforcement learning to actually make that happen. So different kind of translations and relationship between temporal logics and reinforcement learning is another thing. Then using reinforcement learning as a speeding up tool to go through your state space when you are actually doing model checking, that's another trend. So different kind of research trends. This is something that's very, very hot in the formal methods community especially. Okay, and what I want to finish with is your own creation. This is the answer to this came out of your own answers to the question, what is AI, that you gave yesterday. And I found it a little funny that artificial intelligence became mostly about human intelligence. And that's that. So thank you for listening. If you have any questions. No questions. Cool.
I think perhaps too many questions.
Too many questions.
Yeah, I think this was very nice. Thank you very much, Jan.
Thank you for having me.